So we are recording this webinar, and we will be sending out the recording afterwards. Just wanted to let you know that. And as we get started, I wanted to just say something about resiliency in case you're curious or just wondering or don't know what we mean by resiliency. We are all learning together, but what we mean by resilience generally is the ability to recover from or to mitigate vulnerability to climate-related shocks, such as floods, droughts, high heat. The IPCC 6 assessment defines climate resilience as the capacity of social, economic, and ecosystems to cope with a hazardous event or trend or disturbance, while maintaining the capacity for adaptation, learning, and transformation. Resilience in our context is also related to climate justice because it's the most vulnerable who are often being disproportionately impacted by climate disasters. In the case of extreme heat, for example, it's those who work outside, such as farm workers, those without air conditioning, the unhoused community, and the elderly who are most vulnerable. So it's very appropriate for faith communities to play a role in mitigating these harms. September is Preparedness Month in California, so it is great that we are thinking about this topic and how to support our communities in being more resilient to the climate impacts that are coming and are here. We have 4 special guest speakers today who have experience helping faith communities build resilience. We're going to hear short remarks from each of them and then have plenty of time for questions and conversation in the last half of the call. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Reverend Dr. Ambrose Carroll, founder and CEO of Green the Church. I know we have some people here today joining from Green the Church, but if you're not familiar with it, Green the Church is a national nonprofit charged to educate the Black church in the creation of sustainable programs to undergird the work of creating green and efficient church buildings. Dr. Carroll also serves as senior pastor of Renewal Worship Center in Oakland. He is one of our nation's premier practical theologians, and California Interfaith Power Light is proud to have him as a steering committee member. Welcome, Ambrose.
Thank you so much, Susan. Glad to be here with everyone on this Lord's Day. We thank God for the sun that shines so bright, and thank God for the energy that this planet, which is on automatic, you allow it to be, the energy that she gives. Again, my name is Ambrose. I'm the founder of Green the Church, which is an organization founded in 2009 in order to really begin to, tell the story of Black churches and communities that were involved in climate fights, that were involved in environmental justice, renewable energy, food sovereignty, and the like. We were founded in order to be a catalyst and to really begin to tell the story. And so our 3 pillars center around amplifying green theology, promoting sustainable practices, and building power for political and economic change. We've been happy to serve over these years, helping congregations to go solar. We're working with congregations across the state now doing both solar and EV charging and battery storage. We're working, to ensure that these buildings, it was said that in 1910, Black folks owned about 19 million acres of farmland in this country. But of course, through the perilous 40s, 50s, and 60s, we find ourselves lynched off of that land to a large degree and moved to this urban migration to places like California and New York, Chicago, Detroit. And we don't own a lot of farmland anymore. We don't own a lot of skyscrapers, but the Black church owns a lot of faith buildings all over this country. And all of them have to be retrofitted for clean air and clean water, and all of them have the potential to be a part of the infrastructure build out in this nation around electric vehicles and the like, but also to be those resilient centers. I think the very interesting thing is when we think about communities, we usually think about them, along the lines that they were created with redlining and things of that nature around a Black community or white communities, Asian communities. But because of where our churches are located, the infrastructure build out and the disaster preparedness is for all who are in the communities. Because of gentrification, where a lot of our church buildings now live, we don't live there anymore. And yet, and still, those buildings are there for the health and wealth of the community at large. And so we believe that in building them out, we will do good for both people and the planet. Listen, I'm glad to be here again today. God bless you all and God keep you.
Thank you very much, Ambrose. And again, I apologize. I'm not visible right now. Hopefully you're at least seeing my picture. This is Susan Stevenson, California Interfaith Power and Light Executive Director. Our next speaker is Reverend Heather Lee. And Heather Lee is Program Manager and Faith-Based Lead for the San Francisco Community Agencies Responding to Disaster. SFCARD is a disaster preparedness and response consultancy and serves San Francisco and the entire Bay Area. Reverend Lee formerly served as an Episcopal minister and worked with the Red Cross for 6 years. For her work helping churches prepare for emergencies, she has earned the moniker the Disaster Pastor. Welcome, Heather.
Apologies. I was so busy looking for something for you to read rather than just look at my face. I forgot to unmute so you could hear me. Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here and to have a broader audience to share the important work and some of those options that we have when we look at how can we support our communities. Susan asked me a question. She said, how do you see resilience hubs, particularly congregational resilience hubs, fitting into emergency preparedness? And I've got to say that disaster response used to be something that was very like acts of God, sort of, earthquakes, fires, nobody could really know. Hurricanes, you see them coming, but, nobody has control over those. Climate change is now part of our disaster response. We can't, the almanac doesn't work anymore. We don't know what any given day is going to bring to us. It's moving faster than our efforts to retrofit, which is the most important part. Between now and when society changes, when we are able to retrofit the way we live in cities and rural communities, our transportation, there's an opportunity, maybe even an obligation for our houses of worship to participate in that loving our neighbor, caring for the least of those, by utilizing the resources that we have. Pastor Ambrose just talked about zoning a little bit, the fact that most of our houses of worship are embedded in neighborhoods. The fact that they're embedded in neighborhoods puts them right where our youth and our elderly community members are in need of safe haven. And all of that to say, what we have to bring to bear as a resource will depend on that will gauge what it is we're able to offer. These are
I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you meaning to show us slides?
Just one.
Okay.
I just have one.
Okay. I don't see one yet.
But... Okay, because I'm sharing it and it's telling me I'm sharing it. Maybe I can't.
We see your screen.
You can see me. Are you seeing?
I see your
my
background.
blanks? Oh, strange. All right. Someone should have interrupted me a long time ago. All right, let's see if it will share.
You're just kind of small.
I'm not, you know what? I'm not even going to try because I don't know another way to do that. Maybe when I talk, I will, pop up. You can see a big face. Anyway, I will just use my words and then you can watch my hands wave around because I wave them around when I talk. There's what I want to share, what I'm going to call these things are the words that we use in disaster response for them. I break them out into like the type of option you have. I break it out by the length of service. How long would a community member be receiving services, say, in your facility? The first one, the shortest length of service, is something that we call a resource center. We might even call it a local assistance center. You might think of it as a food pantry where people come and receive something, and they're maybe there less than half an hour, like a very short time. And again, I mentioned a food pantry because many of us are already serving our communities in that way. Another sort of service delivery that we can do is something that gets called a drop-in center. Think for charging or cooling. People will be there for a couple of hours because, it takes some time to, charge a battery or charge a device or refill an oxygen tank. Or a cooling center when our neighborhoods, particularly our neighborhoods that are in those urban deserts, there's not enough trees, they're hot, they're very warm. Being able to provide somewhere to cool down is a real gift that we can offer. A third one is an evacuation center. I'm actually going to skip right over this because Rabbi Marv is going to actually go into more depth on this. And we'll do a better job than my brush by. That last opportunity that we have to serve people is in sheltering. I want you to think about what happened in Morocco. Any building still standing right now is providing shelter. To open as a shelter here in the United States, I'm going to tell you it's best to make a relationship with the American Red Cross, who specializes in sheltering around the country. They have lots of experience, and I know this from my own experience volunteering with them, to come in, take very good care of the space, provide the volunteers necessary, and clean it all up when they're done. Sheltering, of course, is a 24/7 proposition for some amount of time. To determine which of these things or how many of these things you might provide through your house of worship or your campus facility is going to be long conversations with a planning team, discussing what you really have. Something that I'm working with Interfaith Power Light, I've worked with Pastor Current on this, is that kind of deep dive into all of the aspects of helping what is able to be provided and for how long, and what are some of the issues that can come up to be prepared for that. Planning is really important. Knowing your local emergency managers is also really important. And I'll leave anything else for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather. Next up, we have Rabbi Marv Goodman. Rabbi Goodman formerly served for nearly 20 years at Peninsula Sinai, a conservative congregation in Foster City, and for 10 years as executive director of the Northern California Board of Rabbis and as rabbi in residence at the San Francisco Jewish Community Federation. Since retiring in 2017, he's been supporting Peninsula Sinai in becoming a Resiliency Hub. And we are proud to have him also as a California IPL steering committee member. And welcome, Marv.
Thank you, Susan. Make sure that I'm unmuted. Yes, thank you, Susan, and thank you to the other speakers who've already spoken, and to Reverend John, who will speak soon. Here's what I'm going to focus on quickly. What our synagogue did to get to where we're at now, why we decided to become a resiliency center, what we've learned along the way, how we've been challenged, and where we're at now. In the beginning, and this was the week of Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the creation of the world. In our tradition, that's what Rosh Hashanah, the high holy days, are all about, the creation of the world. But in the beginning, with the help of California Interfaith Power and Light, we did research, we interviewed vendors, We prepped our building as best we could. And some of the research we did led us to the understanding that as a result of changing light fixtures to LEDs, we would reduce the number of solar panels we need by about 25%. So we did that. We have this congregant who is a little bit crazy for doing stuff around the synagogue, and he changed all the light fixtures, whether they're fluorescent or others. He changed them all to LEDs. And then we had a discussion after we were in the process of putting on the solar panels about batteries. Solar panels were a no-brainer because they were going to save us money in the long run. Well, batteries we knew would cost us $20,000 or $30,000, and we'd never recover that money. We decided to get the batteries as a kind of public service for the community we live in. We wanted to show that we cared and are a responsible member of the community, not just for our synagogue members, because in an emergency, who knows who will walk in the door. After we did that, the most important thing we ended up doing was, as Heather said, getting in touch with the Red Cross. After installing the solar panels, we were connected again by CIPL to the Red Cross in this case, to discuss what it means to be a resilience center from their perspective. The Red Cross is critical to have as a partner. I don't think you can do this without them. Maybe we should have done this earlier in the process, but we, at least at that point, once we got the solar panels on, we started talking with the Red Cross. We learned that there are different options that Heather mentioned to being a center for the community in case of a disaster. We didn't want to be an overnight shelter, so we decided to be what the Red Cross calls an evacuation center. It's a place where people can gather in an emergency and would be directed from there where to go if they needed shelter. We're not in a position to be able to shelter people, but we are in a position to have them come to us for a few hours. We could be the kind of cooling center that Heather talked about. We could be a charging station for phones, as she also said, a place to store meds. If people have meds that need to be stored in refrigerators and electricity is out, we could be a place in our battery operated kitchen for people to cool and keep their medicines cool. Or we get to be a temporary place for people to gather and eat and rest and cool until they're ready to go to a Red Cross shelter or similar place if need be. The Red Cross connected us to the county office, which you'll also have to do, of emergency services, encourage us to be in touch with local government leaders, since an institution like ours needs an MOU with the local government if they want to be a Red Cross evacuation center. And we have a MOU with the city we're in, that's Foster City. The Red Cross connected us with the San Mateo Fire Department Office of Emergency Services. The two of them, the organizations, the Red Cross and the Emergency Services Department, did an assessment to determine if our facilities were appropriate to be an evacuation center. So to speak, we passed, and we are technically an evacuation center. It's very important to understand that in case of an emergency, the Red Cross will be on hand at our synagogue, and they will lead the effort. We just need to let them in, and help is needed. We're not in charge. It feels for me very reassuring to know that an organization like the Red Cross in an emergency is in charge, and we just need to show up. The kinds of emergencies that we might be called upon to help with include, and there were some of these recently in the area, fire, and we weren't asked to participate as a evacuation center, but fires in complexes where people needed to find another place to stay for a period of time, in which case they could come to us and be directed to where they can stay for however long they need to be housed, like in hotels that the Red Cross arranges. Some of what we've learned from our Red Cross contact is that generally there's no general publicity to the community about resilience hubs, possible temporary evacuation shelter points, or shelters. In the event of a disaster, the communities don't want people to run to the ones that they think might be open, but might actually not be open. So at the time of a disaster, the Red Cross said, and the city said, the city or county will decide which shelters are to be open, and they will publicize them. The Red Cross does not self-deploy. In other words, the city or county decides the locations to be open and requests the Red Cross to assist. This has led to some challenges for us because we're not really sure what we're supposed to do as we, in a manner of speaking, wait for an emergency. Obviously, pray that it doesn't happen, but what do we do in the interim? And since we signed the MOU with the local government, which has been in between 6 months and a year, there's been no communication with the city letting us know if there are other Red Cross centers in our city. We have suggested to them that we talk to the other centers if they exist so we can learn from each other. So it feels like we're kind of waiting and not knowing how it'll play out, if it plays out at all. We hope it doesn't, obviously. And in conclusion, hopefully there won't be a need for us to open. However, just in case, we're trying to get as ready as possible. And hopefully we'll figure out with the city and the county and the Red Cross how to make sure that people know and we can be the best we can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Marv. Very helpful to hear those specifics. And our next speaker and final speaker is Reverend John Current, who gave us the blessing at the top of the hour. I also just want to take a moment to remind folks that we will have question and answer after our final speaker, Pastor Current. And if you have a question that comes to mind or has already come to mind, feel free to go ahead and put it in the Q&A and look for that little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So Reverend John Current of Hope United Methodist Church in South San Francisco is focused on leading his church community into a posture of defending God's creation. Hope Methodist has installed solar power and a battery power storage system to provide the surrounding community with clean energy during times of grid failure, blackouts, and other emergencies. Pastor Current has also worked as a city planner and currently volunteers for the Red Cross and Civil Air Patrol. Welcome, Pastor Current.
Thank you, Susan, and the rest of the team. Rabbi Marv, it's always good to hear what you all are doing in your neighborhood. And it reminds me that each neighborhood, each community is different. What might be a need in one neighborhood, let's say a cooling center in the middle of summer heat, may not apply in others. We happen to be in a very cool climate here in very near the ocean and get a marine layer that comes in the summer. So that's not the need. But we do have specific needs in this community that this church has tried to respond to. We have moved into this posture of resilience center, kicking and screaming as churches have done, as I've worked with churches over the years. I know that sometimes it's a miracle just to get the trustees to shake their head yes. And that's what actually happened here. As we were, something was happening as we looked at the environment and became more and more environmentally sensitive and wanting to do something. All of us as individuals and in our faith communities perhaps want to do something, but just don't know what to do. And that's why we're here at this meeting today, this sharing today, on trying to find out what we might be able, or you might be able to do in your community. Finally, after 4 or 5 years of talking, Interfaith Power Light came to us, one of their employees, actually on Zoom. It was right around the time of COVID. And finally, our trustees were able to listen. The partnership between Interfaith Power and Light and our own church, our own faith community bloomed that night, and they said, yes, we're going to move forward on the solar panels. So then COVID hit, and right in the middle of COVID, we had solar panels installed. Things were happening here. The position of being a resilience center had not even hit our minds. We wanted to be an example. We wanted to provide seeds to the community, as well as move our community toward a a posture of getting rid of all of our carbon creating heating and things of this sort. And in addition to that, we found it was cheaper to go on to solar power than to continue to burn the fossil fuels. So that's how we got into this. As time went on, as is now, we are continuing to grow in our understanding of resiliency and what that means. We broadened our partnership with the county of San Mateo. Their Office of Sustainability provided a grant to us and our partners, Interfaith Power and Light, and we installed a storage battery. So now we had a solar system and we had a power battery. And the question was, okay, we're a faith community. How do we use this to serve people? And that's how the Resiliency Center was born here. So we started off in last December. We had a great opening, and before you know it, our power grid went down. And in the early times of the power grid going down, we had to figure out, well, okay, so how are we going to do this thing? And the first problem, I know Susan likes this story. The first problem was I live about 15-minute walk from church, and I went down to hop in my car to drive over. The grid was down, and the garage door wouldn't open. So then I'm now on the street walking, and I saw that the street lights were off and the traffic lights were off, and it became a ministry just helping people cross the street in the middle of the winter in rush hour. So there's many different facets to this thing. As we came to the building and found that we were the only building in the neighborhood where the light was shining through the window, the next question became, well, this is really the question that we're all trying to address now. How do we reach the people? We had passed out pamphlets. We had talked it up. We had shared a lot of things. We had the technology, the hardware there, but we still needed to reach the people. And so we've been in conversation with Heather. We've been in conversation with all the folks that are talking to you this morning, trying to figure out how to become a resiliency hub. And we've moved to one place that I am pushing everyone to understand that resiliency starts with people. It starts with people. The hardware is good, but you must include people in your planning and in your implementation. Well, God be with you on your particular journey as you figure out what you're going to do in your faith community.
Thank you so much, Pastor Current. And thanks to all of our speakers. It's been really helpful to hear about your experience. And just so our audience knows, we're all learning. This is new, and we are learning as we go. And we all have the intention, I think, to support our communities in being more resilient to these impacts that are happening. We're eager to hear about your experiences as well. If you've had experience with creating a resiliency hub or been involved in providing resilience for your community, share that with us too in the Q&A. And I know one of the things that our audience members may be wondering about, and I already see in the questions, is funding. So I wanted to let you know that funding for these types of projects is becoming more available. For the ones you just heard about, we were able to help get these projects to get funding from the County of San Mateo and from Peninsula Clean Energy. Those are two local sources of funding. There is a lot of local funding. I think one of the first things to do is to check your local community energy aggregator, your utility, city or county, to see what kind of funding there is for resiliency projects or hubs. If you're in PG&E territory, they do offer grants for resiliency once a year that are fairly competitive. You can apply for those. And also the Strategic Growth Council, that's California government, has funding that can be applied for every year. I believe Gregory is going to share some of these links, if we can, out through the Q&A feature or the chat. And we are also going to send you a follow-up to this webinar with more information. The federal EPA has grant opportunities coming up. And I believe the one for 2023, the grant application time period has closed, but I believe they'll have more opportunities coming up as well. So that's a website to check. For solar with no upfront costs, we recommend working with Revolve, which is a nonprofit that specifically is founded to help nonprofits, including congregations, go solar. They are also going to be able to finance batteries as well. So let's get started with questions from the Q&A. And do we have anything, Gregory, that stands out that we're getting a lot of questions on?
So far, our main question is about funding, but I think the question you had for Heather would be a good one to start with.
Question for Heather. Yes. One thing we were wondering, Heather, is how do you, just kind of being familiar with the overall landscape of work of disaster preparedness, how do you think congregations and faith communities can complement that in their communities?
That was the whole thing I answered. That's how I framed my my little intro. I can repeat myself, or do you have something more specific? It really, like, the very best thing that our houses of worship have is that zoning laws have stuck them, inside neighborhoods for the most part. And that just that creates a communal gathering place, particularly in more suburban neighborhoods that don't exist. There is no other facility like that. I don't know. What do you have do you want something more specific?
Thank you, Heather. Yeah,
I have another question for you.
Oh, go ahead.
Can you speak to the process of starting to work with the Red Cross? Are there MOUs that are pre-written, or are they hard to create? Is it a ChatGPT kind of thing, or can you speak on that?
Okay, so I haven't played with ChatGPT yet, but I suspect that the more people who use it to write an MOU, the better it will get at writing MOUs. If you reach out to wherever you are, you reach out to your local Red Cross. They're definitely one for every county in the United States. And they're going to have one to start with. They do this all the time. They're in the business of that. Emergency managers have them. The interesting thing about memorandums of understanding is they can be as simple or as complicated as you need them to be. Sometimes it's, it's just slightly more than a handshake. It's just a piece of paper that says, hey, we agree if there's a disaster, we agree to talk to each other and see what we can do with a, contact. Sometimes I have seen them hundreds of pages long, detailing if something happens, who's financially responsible. It's going to be what is both common and comfortable for your organization. I'm going to pass it over to Rabbi Marv, because he's got his hand up.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that we got a sample MOU when we were starting. I forgot who it's from, to be honest. And I just gave it to a lawyer in the congregation. It's like I didn't want to get involved in it. And the lawyer was in touch with Foster City, and there were some issues that it was very easy.
Good to hear. Gregory, thank you. I see you've put these a lot of links into the chat. Hopefully everybody can see that. And that's some resources on possible funding opportunities. And I mean, one of the things I was wondering if you all could address, I mean, what is the spiritual side of this? One of the things I feel like will be helpful for our communities is to have a place that is welcoming to them in the event of an emergency. So instead of going down to a really large, civic arena or gym, people have a place in their neighborhood where they can feel welcome and go. And one of the things that we had talked about a lot with Pastor Current, with you and your congregation, is spiritual resilience. How do we address that side of it, and how do we help our communities, our faith communities, become more spiritually resilient in the face of climate change?
Well, one of the things that we're coming to grips with is that resiliency is not just sitting around waiting for a disaster to occur. Okay, and then you're saying, okay, we're going to help you get out of this. Right now, the biggest issue that I've run across as I've tried to wrestle with this is even in my own congregation, as well as in the surrounding community, is anxiety, what we're calling environmental anxiety. People are seeing the disasters occur around them, even if it's not in their own neighborhood. They're hearing the reports. They're wrestling with deniers. They may be deniers themselves, but people are carrying a heavy mental health load. And this is going to increase. We're going to see a society, not only our own society, but a global society of humanity, which is turned upside down. We don't have the historical resources to pull from, historical stories for this magnitude of disaster. This last Sunday in our tradition, we were dealing with the Moses track of the scripture, where Moses is in Egypt when many plagues hit, and it spoke to us because we're just coming through the pandemic, but the floods and all of those types of things that we're seeing today, we're going to need to reach into our own resources and find ways of talking about this theologically, providing care, and helping people through this time. Well, and lastly, our church, our name is Hope. Okay, so for a church named Hope, we have pretty much identified what our role is. Our primary role is to help people have hope, even in times like these. So I'm hoping that everyone will work where they are to make a difference through whatever lenses they're seeing the world through. Thank you.
Thank you. I see a lot of questions popping up in the Q&A, and also some folks sharing experiences. Here's a question from Thomas. What happens when a pastor or other faith leader advocates in favor of investing or becoming a resilience hub? That is, in general, what kinds of responses to top-down initiatives receive from the trustees and member congregations? So I think that's a question about how can we, and Thomas, you can clarify if you like, but what happens when the pastor is advocating, and how do you get engagement from the rest of the congregation? Anybody want to speak to that one?
Rabbi Marvin, you want to?
I can start. For us, it was initially, because we were going solar, it was initially an issue of saving money, because we have a lease agreement, and in 6 years we will have paid it off, 6 or 7 years, and it's not costing us any more. The lease is not costing us any more than the PG&E bill has been. So it was, as I said earlier, it was a no-brainer. And it really wasn't coming. In this case, it came from me, the Rabbi Emeritus, but also from some lay people. I think you can't do this. At least I wouldn't do it in my synagogue, having been there, as Susan said, almost 20 years. I wouldn't do it without lay support, without building that lay support up beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Really important. How about each of our, I would love to just hear, like, what is a key point or piece of advice each of our speakers would have, a tip or or even a warning to people on this webinar who are considering doing this in their own house of worship. What is something that you would like to share with them, in a good piece of advice or information that they might like to have going forward? I'll put that first to Heather.
My best piece of advice is to remember that we are here for a time and we leave. For anything that we want to do, especially something like this, if there's only one person that has the drive and the motivation to do it, there's only one person pushing this forward, whether it's a resilience center or, simply, being better about our climate and just solar panels, just for us internally. Make sure that it's not just one person, because when they're gone, you have solar panels no one knows how to use, how to maintain, what they're for. Same with an MOU for some kind of resilience hub. Don't do it by yourself.
Thank you. How about you, Ambrose?
Yeah, for me, I would say really embrace the holistic nature of what we are doing together. I think that understanding it from a theological standpoint, for us at Green the Church, we really work hard to ensure that we don't even talk about environmentalism, we talk about revival, right? That there is a revival afoot, that the earth is in need of being revived. There are some things that we have to remember. So for us, we really lean on the notion of having green teams to make sure that the movement itself is a part of the culture. That as we approach it, we understand it theologically, philosophically, socially, historically, and that it's not simply about the technology in and of itself, but it is about the holistic nature of a very move of God. It is about the salvific plan of the Creator that was held in the beginning. It is about being reconciled to one another and reconciled to our God. So for me, it's really understanding it from that standpoint, all throughout your congregation, whether it is your youth or your young adults or your seniors, and really for those who do the work, the lay leaders, we really want to let them see one another in different places doing this work. Being excited. Thank you.
Thank you. How about Pastor Current? Do you have a piece of advice you could share? What is the top thing you think people should know before embarking on creating Resiliency Hub?
I think the kernel is why you're doing it. I'm sitting here, we're talking about this. I guess for people that are tuning in, what are you going to do? I think that's the big question. The creation itself is threatened by all our scientists. This is our reality. So what are you going to do? As an individual, it starts with individual, and collectively as a faith community. The United Nations believes that faith communities can make a difference. I believe that faith communities can make a difference. You're here, you probably believe the same thing. Where are you going to get started? That's the important thing. Get started. As Heather would say, have a champion. Have someone that's involved. Know why you're doing it. Put it in the context of your belief system, but do something. I think that's the important thing. To do nothing is really not an option anymore.
Thank you. Get started. And sometimes the beginning is the hardest part of the work. How about you, Rabbi Marv? What advice do you
I say
have?
ditto to what not my predecessors, my other panelists had to say. And I think the climate issue is so overwhelming. There's one person who continually says to me, think global, act local. Do what we can do in our own synagogues, in our own churches, in our own institutions. And one of the first things I would do would be to find the Red Cross contact person in my city, my county, because I think that they are going to be able to hold your hand and support you in this process. And maybe that's something, Susan, we could send out any Red Cross contact person we have in different counties to the group in the email you're going to send out.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Rabbi Marv. Yeah, Red Cross seems to be a really key partner in this work. We also have a question I see from the audience about microgrids, where one building could go solar and provide solar to other surrounding buildings. Does anyone, any of our speakers have experience with that? Or do any of you of your faith facilities have more than one building?
Well, I can, again, I come from a futurist background, an urban planning background, so neighborhood development is one of my things. There are many different options in the development of solar. It doesn't have to be putting it on your building. A whole community could decide to go solar. You can even build a solar farm out in the middle of the desert that feeds into the grid that would count toward your facility having less of a carbon footprint. There are many different ways to do that. So, but if you're going that route, you got to put things in place. You've got to get in touch with the community. You've got to get in touch with those other facilities that you're trying to hook into a grid, and that might be an option in some places. I'm just trying to get a small faith community to do something to include other folks in decisions on power grids. That goes beyond my expertise right now and what I'm able to do as a pastor. Thanks.
One of the organizations that we work with is 350.org, Bill McKibben's org, and they did this thing, which I think you could do at your own congregation. I don't know how it would play out, but they had individual smaller batteries that could be solar powered. And so they could be distributed out rather than people having to come to you. But if your congregation had 10 of them, then maybe people could come and charge their medical devices, or you could distribute them somehow. But that makes me think the one thing that growing up in a Southern Baptist church taught me is that when I was sick, when I was not at church on Wednesday night and Thursday night and Friday night and whatever night, someone was knocking on my door. And they were knocking on my door and they had a casserole. And they said, "Are you okay?" And they did it. They meant it, And I got phone calls from my small group leader, and I got phone calls from the care team. And so begin to think of your resiliency hub in the way we used to think about phone trees and people getting sick. Because if you have an emergency, I just found out that I'm diabetic and that I have to have certain medicines in the fridge. And so in my membership card at my Unitarian Universalist Church, I'm going to say, well, let's have a disaster section that says Gregory takes insulin and it needs to be refrigerated. And if a disaster strikes in his area, let's pick up the phone, call. If he doesn't answer, is someone else listed that we can call? I mean, this is in depth. This is something maybe your green team could take on. But all of our congregations, or a majority of them, have membership documents. We have little files on folks. What if we just use that, boosted it up, and then we could kind of figure out how to navigate a disaster? Because the real tricky stuff is not just installing the solar. It's like even a question was mentioned there. It's how do you keep it up? Who's going to come and clean it? And does it need to be cleaned? And there's little questions beyond the bigger stuff that are really, really important. And one thing Pastor Current has taught me is to, like he said, keep it people focused. We can keep it solar focused, but in reality, if it's people focused, then all the other stuff will just follow suit.
Keep it people focused. All right. So another comment we have is about the about an Episcopal church in Davis that has adopted a carbon neutral by 2030 plan and helped the entire Northern California Episcopal Diocese to adopt a resolution for all of the churches in the diocese to become carbon neutral. And is that a way for congregations in California to jumpstart climate resilience by becoming carbon neutral? It sounds like, you know, our congregations that have become resilience hubs, one of the first things they did was to reduce their carbon footprint primarily by going solar. But what do you think, panelists? Is that something that congregations should look at first, is going carbon neutral, and how does that tie in to resilience? I will ask Pastor Current first.
Sure. I thought that was, as you were reading that, I said, wow, somebody's doing some good work. They've identified some goals, and they've got other churches to follow suit. So yes, do that. The carbon neutrality is a goal for everyone, and in our individual homes also, and lives.
Right. Anyone else want to comment on that?
You know, I would say that it's a good idea, but I wouldn't want to bring it to my synagogue until there were some other synagogues or other churches that were doing it, and we can do it together. We can support each other and urge each other. If I'm sloughing off a bit or sloughing off a little bit, somebody's going to say, well, how you doing? And it's going to get me to move on what we need to do. I think it's a great idea, but I don't think congregations can do it. Most congregations probably can't do it on their own. They need some kind of team of congregations to work together with.
Yeah, so I serve as Vice President of Berkeley Black Ecumenical Ministers Alliance. And in Berkeley, it has become the law that we want to, you know, make sure that all the buildings are fully electric by 2030, 2035 or so. So we have to now have conversations about ovens that congregations have, you know, purchased, that are gas ovens, and a lot of other things. A lot of our churches still have boilers in them with asbestos and other things. So there's a lot of work that has to be done in these churches, again, that were purchased, you know, 40, 50 years ago. And a lot of them have not done that general efficiency work and haven't, you know, gotten those feasibility studies to understand what these congregations need. And now we're going to be forced to do that and also come up with the resources in order to rectify it. And right now, if they don't, then we'll be looking at fines and other things. And so as we come together and talk about all of these pieces, we have to look at the financial reality, because part of our reality is that we can, you know, green our buildings and then not be in those buildings. And again, also the climate reality, right? This changing climate. These are the change in climate and environment, the larger context that things happening is a part of the fact. So these issues of justice and those things continue to breed to the surface.
Thanks, Ambrose. I see one more question that's pretty specific. I'm going to just see if people have advice on this. It's a question from Tom Smith. For those who own their solar and battery system, do you have a maintenance plan or a maintenance contract?
I'd like to speak from our context.
Yes.
We don't own it. We purchased it or are in the process of purchasing it. We got into something that is right before us, which is really addressed, and that is how simple it can be to install a solar panel and finance it. And you all have all the answers at Interfaith Power and Light. If we had not partnered with you and you had not connected us with the funding source and the installers, we wouldn't have done it. So I think that we need to highlight that. Now, we don't own it. However, in 20 years, we will own it. And we're still paying less money for power than we were paying when we were on the grid. Okay, so that's the point. And our partner company also maintains it. Since it belongs to them, they maintain it, they monitor it. If there's a power fluctuation, they come and fix it, or they remotely through their computer program. So it's a win-win all around for us for not owning it at this point.
Thank you for pointing that out. I do think that's a really good option for a lot of congregations and nonprofits in general that don't have the upfront cash to buy these systems. However, the solar does save you money in most cases. So you could think about doing the solar first and using that to finance your battery and your resiliency efforts. Rabbi Marv, do y'all own solar or battery?
It's on a lease at this point, and I'm not a financial person, so I just got it going and help push it through to the finish line. So I don't know.
Okay.
But I'll ask.
Well, often the case is, even if you own the a lot of times the solar company will come out and clean and maintain, and often there's a warranty where they'll replace a panel.
Yeah, I'm sure there is.
Okay, well, I can't believe it, but we're already about at the end of our hour here. Thanks to everybody for being a great audience and being so attentive. And thank you to our speakers. Thank you for the tech grace. I hope you've been able to offer us I'm sorry I'm not visible. We are just experimenting with this new webinar system, and there's always got to be some glitch. But we will be sharing and I know people are asking about the chat. We will copy the chat, and it's not really a chat. It's there's a chat, and we'll copy those. Comment that any of our speakers would like to make. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us. Let's please keep in touch, everybody, on this webinar. If you want help, we want to help you with being more resilient, with creating a resiliency hub, with hooking you up with resources if we possibly can. Let's keep in touch. And thank you very much to our speakers for sharing your experiences with us today. And have a good rest of the afternoon, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.